Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Hello everyone, I'm Troy Moling and thanks for joining us today on Market Journal. Coming to you today from the 2021 Husker Harvest Day Show in Grand Island. The event has been going on for over 40 years and gives producers a look at the latest equipment, supplies, and technology in farming today. Always a great time and glad we could be a part of it again this year. And for the producers who will be back out in the fields for harvest, our first story this week is just for you. With harvest comes the marketing of the new crop, and it will be crucial that farmers first check with their local grain storage facility to see their discount schedule and unloading procedures. Heartland Farm Partners President Jeff Peterson stopped by to discuss some of the finer points of getting to know your 2021 discount schedules with Market Journal's Bill Dodd.
Every grain elevator that receives corn or soybeans will have its own discount schedule. These schedules are important in terms of the way they communicate how and when various factors, such as shrinkage, are applied upon delivery. As discount schedules vary from elevator to elevator, it's important to keep up on any annual changes to the schedule or delivery procedures, especially when it's time to head in for harvest.
You know, this time of year, especially where we've got stocks are tight, and basically what that means is that there's a lot of people looking for the corn, the first corn off the combine, the first soybeans off the combine. What you'll generally find on the discount schedules is that they may be willing to take grain at a higher moisture level, and they may also not discount that grain as much because they want to incentivize the movement of it. So it's important to keep in touch with that. The other thing to watch really closely is what are their maximums on moisture. So maybe a certain elevator normally would only take it up to 20% moisture, but this time of year, maybe if they really want the bushels, maybe they'll take it up to 25%. So keep in touch on that. The other big thing to watch is just to make sure you know what their dump hours are, you know what their harvest hours are, because those could be quite a bit different than what you see during the normal business hours once harvest gets started.
Though some elevators may accept corn that's a bit higher in moisture than usual, it's still important to make sure that your delivery isn't too high where moisture is concerned, especially when things like white corn or other specialty crops are involved.
Yeah, the too high part gets to be kind of interesting. So we'll start off kind of the worst case scenario. You could end up getting the grain rejected and it just doesn't meet the contract specs. And if you're just dealing with at harvest time with just normal number 2 yellow corn, that's one thing. But where we even see some bigger issues than that is, let's say you've actually contracted, say, some white corn or some type of specialty crops. They normally have a little bit lower moisture level, so as a result, you may not be able to meet the contract specs. They may reject the contract. And then in addition to that, you may also have a penalty for getting out of that contract, so that could come into play. The other thing that happens when you bring in moisture that's a little bit higher is the fact that you're going to have discounts that are going to apply to that moisture, and that's going to impact the price that you end up ultimately receiving for your grain.
If the grain is reading too high on moisture content, there are a number of ways your overall sale could be impacted.
Yeah, there is a number of them. Starting first on corn, what we end up finding is that there's some locations that will just shrink the bushels down. So if you think about it, really what that is a quantity discount. So they're adjusting how many bushels of grain you have. So for instance, they might shrink your bushels 3% or 4%. Another very common way, and I'd probably say the most common one, is that they do a shrink of the bushels, which is about 1.5%. And their logic behind that is that whether they dried those bushels or your bushels stayed out in the field, there's going to be a certain amount of natural shrink that's going to happen. And then on top of that 1.5%, then they may charge a drying charge, which could be anywhere from 3 to 5 cents a bushel. Kind of depends on what the cost of natural gas or propane is and those operating costs. So that's one way. We call that a shrink and a dry method. We've also got a percentage of adjustment to the quantity. And the other one that you do end up seeing at times is that where they'll take a percentage of what your contract price is. So it's a adjustment on price, but it's not broke into shrink and drying charge. It's just based on a percentage. That one I'm not probably quite as favorable with or like as much, because it depends on where you sold your grain. So if you sold your grain and had a really good price, then it could be costing you more than somebody who maybe is selling at harvest time and the price isn't as high.
On the other end of the scale, being too low on moisture content could mean leaving money in the field.
Yeah, so what you run into is that on corn and soybeans, let's start there on corn first, there really isn't any type of time when too low of a price ultimately impacts your sale, other than the fact that what you're doing is that you're missing out on selling water. So generally what you're looking at is that 15% is kind of the break line on corn, and 13% is the break on soybeans, and that's where they start their discounts. So what you're doing is you're just not getting as much really weight as you could in the corn example. On the soybean example, it works the same way. Generally, we have a little more problem with too dry of soybeans. Soybeans dry out really fast, so it's really hard to get the beans at 13%. And what's interesting is that how we look at that is that, let's say you haul in something that's say at 12%. What our estimation would be is that if you have 1.5% shrink per point of moisture, you take that 1.5% shrink, and let's say we've got $12.50 soybeans, we're estimating that would actually cost you, or you'd leave about $9.37 an acre on the table. If you'd have had that up to that 13 level, you'd have picked up. But here's what gets really interesting. You get all the way down to 8% moisture, and actually you're probably leaving about $47 worth of revenue on the table, figuring 50 bushels the acre soybeans.
As harvest begins to ramp up, you'll want to make sure that you familiarize yourself with any changes to your local elevator's discount schedule and delivery policies. This will help ensure that you're putting yourself in the best possible position when it comes to marketing your newly harvested crop. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Bill Dodd.
Thanks, Bill. Jeff also tells us it's important to watch for foreign material in your deliveries, as too much of it could impact your overall sale. Good advice. And that's a great segue into markets this week with North Dakota State University ag economist Frayne Olson. Frayne, always good to see you. Let's jump right in today with a question about harvest and crop conditions. I know your area is still under a pretty severe drought. What's the latest you can tell us?
Yeah, wheat harvest is pretty much wrapped up. We're working on some of the specialty crops right now. Canola is getting towards the end. We're in the middle of dryable bean harvest. I know in Nebraska you have some dry bean guys. We're kind of partway through that right now. There's a few folks have tried to take off some soybeans, especially in the east where we had a little bit earlier planting. Yield reports are all over the board. Corn, we're still a ways off on some of our corn. I did hear of one guy that took off some high moisture corn just to get some into an ethanol plant that was really begging for some supplies here. But we really won't get rolling with corn for several weeks yet. Again, when we talk to what yield expectations are, extremely variable. I mean, on average, we're going to be down because of the drought. But you will hear some reports of some better crop yields coming in, something near normal for certain areas of the state.
Frayne, talk to me about corn and soybean basis as we get into harvest.
Yeah, and that's going to, this year, it's going to be very unusual. Typically, we see, basis levels kind of soften as we go into harvest, especially up here in the northern growing regions, because we have this flood of grain suddenly hitting the system. But because of Hurricane Ida, and in particular some of the slowdown in the export pace out of the Louisiana Gulf terminals, the grain terminals down there, we're going to see some really kind of strange dynamics in local basis levels. The basis levels along those river terminals, if your supply chain is going to the river and then off into the Gulf, your basis levels are going to be quite variable trying to regulate that flow of grain. Versus as you get into the western corn belt, some of those export deliveries now have been shifted into the Pacific Northwest or those P&W ports. And so we've seen, at least locally here, some real supportive basis levels. Our basis levels are, for this time of year, exceptionally small. I mean, very small negative numbers. Normally, for example, on soybeans, we're -80, -$1. Right now, we're -25 to 30. Very similar thing for corn. So we're going to see some unusual grain movements this year. The basis levels, your local market is trying to regulate that flow of grain, not only over time, but also over distance, over space. So we're going to try and pull more of our grain into the PNW market to try and backfill some of the slower deliveries out of the Gulf.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we had that post-harvest rally last year. Any chance of something like that happening again this time around?
It's, in my opinion, very unlikely. So let's talk about what caused that. Well, we were coming out of the winter months. The Phase 1 agreement had been signed. We weren't sure what the Chinese demand base was going to be. We hit the harvest delivery period, and all of a sudden the Chinese came in and started buying a lot more aggressively than we first had expected. We knew that there was going to be a recovery, but the purchases were much stronger and more aggressive than we thought, and that really started this rally as we got into the post-harvest. Well, right now the dynamics in China, in particular Chinese feed market, are very different. The profitability for pork production is much lower. Crushing margins for soybeans in China are at a negative right now and have been for a while. So we do expect to see, and already have seen, some pretty decent Chinese buying of both corn and soybeans, mainly soybeans at this stage of the game. But this is now kind of booked into the psychology. We already kind of anticipating that the Chinese will come back on a more regular basis, kind of a typical cycle. And we're probably looking at export volumes similar to what we saw last year. So that's already kind of built into the system, so the shock value is much less.
Okay, and real quick on winter wheat, because I always like to get in a wheat question when you join us on the show. 12% of the U.S. crop has been planted, and it is early, but what are your expectations for this year's winter wheat crop?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I guess my expectation is we'll probably get winter wheat seedings. So let's separate winter wheat into the hard red winter wheat and soft red winter wheat. Soft red, I expect acreage to be similar to what we saw last year. There's really no big incentive to increase our acreage base. On the hard red winter wheat side, I think we might see a small increase in hard red winter wheat seedings, primarily because it's also an alternative feed source for some of our livestock folks. So for some of those areas that have been buying up some of the calves here that we're selling in the northern tier, that makes a really nice feeding regime. So I think that we will see, not only because of market incentives in hard red winter wheat, but also because of this alternative feed source, I do think we'll at least see initial hard red winter wheat plantings to be up a little bit by the time we get the numbers in January.
Next week, we'll be joined by Central Valley Ag's Luke Beckman. Next up, the spread of soybean gall midge continued into the 2021 growing season. Since its discovery in 2018, the pest has now been identified in 140 counties in Nebraska, South Dakota, Minnesota, Iowa, and Missouri. That includes 8 new counties in Nebraska this year alone. Nebraska Crop Protection and Cropping System Specialist Justin McMechan joined me to offer an update on SGM's spread and to look at some new management options.
It's those 6 counties on soybean, 2 additional counties beyond that on sweet clover, which, separating those 2 out I think is important. We are getting still really good at finding it, from last year where we were getting really good at finding within a field where to look. Now we're utilizing like USDA Cropscape to identify rotations. So getting out into these really remote areas and finding it. But I think you're right. I think we're looking at spread of the insect as we go west. Whether or not it just establishes itself out there or actually becomes a problem out there, I think is 2 real big questions for growers there, especially out in those counties.
Anything with the research this year that surprised you?
Yeah, we did a lot of new studies this year. One was to look at its distribution in the field as it emerged and how far it went into the field. We were surprised to find it at 500 feet into the field after the first adults emerged or during that first emergence. That was surprising. Obviously we had some tactics that were really surprising that we didn't know, but the insect also emerged earlier than anticipated based on the last 2 years by almost 2 weeks. So I think it's safe to say gall midge is going to continue to surprise us going forward because we just don't have a lot of historical knowledge on it.
And you've written that hilling could be a potential SGM strategy. Talk to me about how that works.
Yeah, it's a really primitive tactic. I mean, there's nothing really crazy about it. We simply covered the base of the soybean plants early in the season, just as gall midge emerged. Actually, we were 5 days after adult emergence. So there's this tiny area at the base of the plant that is susceptible to soybean gall midge. These little fissures or cracks occur, and we simply came in with a tillage unit and pushed soil up around that base, and by covering that, the adults can't lay eggs. And so essentially we cut out all infestation, and there's these beautiful pictures that show up of 98% dead, which for an entomologist that's pretty neat, to 100% alive, or near 100% alive. So it's told us a lot about the insects' need to infest that small portion at the base of the plant. A tactic that not all growers are going to be able to use. I think it's going to be a limited group. Really, really useful for researchers like myself to understand the insect.
Was it one of those things, hey, let's just try it, simple enough to work?
Yeah, actually we ran across it in a survey. So Nebraska Soybean Board and North Central Soybean Research Program funded survey. We dropped through the Columbus area and hit a ridge-tilled field. And we're looking for gall midge, no gall midge. We'd seen gall midge prior to that. Left that field and immediately right back into gall midge. And as we were in that field looking, I thought, man, there's no place for them. It's all been covered up. I thought, why don't we just do that as a control tactic?
Any idea regarding yield loss for impacted producers?
Yeah, I would say this year's probably not going to be as bad for growers as it was last year. And I say that knowing that some growers watching this are probably having a worse year this year than they did the previous year. So what that tells us is across Nebraska, eastern Nebraska, we're getting varying levels of pressure each year. And so some are going to see tremendous losses, maybe in the 50% category for the field, which is a lot. Others are going to see that 5 to 10% or not even noticeable but have the insect present. And so we have a survey going that tries to document that, but it's really hard to document the level of severity relative to yield loss in the state.
Talk to me about management options producers could have for the 2022 growing season.
Yeah, it's not any easier of a picture than it was when we left the 2021 season. We have the hilling, which we talked about as a really high potential strategy. We've done a lot more insecticide work. We looked at methodology of foliar application. There are opportunities there, but what I tell growers, if you're on 15-inch row spacings, I have a hard time delivering a good tactic to you. You're on 30-inch rows, I can do a lot, or some other tactics that are available. Planting date is how we start next season, so deciding the planting date. And this year is a near flip to 2020, where it appears, based on what we've seen so far this year, that our later planting dates are going to do better. And Natasha Umeziu is a new master's student. She's taken up that work, and so she's really taken that to a new level. I'd say people have to see that talk or presentation to really understand what those planting dates are doing over time. So some tactics out there, nothing's 100% except the hilling, and even it breaks down over time. We've just got a lot to learn. I think gall midge told us again this year, it's not going to be an easy insect to manage because it has this long duration of emergence, which means we just can't throw one thing at it and have it go away.
Justin says producers can help out researchers like him by going to soybeangallmidge.org. And if you suspect you have soybean gall midge and are in a county that isn't documented on the map, then notify your local extension office. Next up, along with scouting those fields for pests, now is also a great time to be looking for different varieties of crown and stalk rot in corn and soybeans. During this time of year, growers may see plant death start at the top and work its way down. UNL Plant and Pest Diagnostic Coordinator Kyle Broderick offers a few pointers on what to do.
One of the main symptoms that we tend to see with a lot of stalk rots is just a general necrosis of the plant tissue, where the plant tends to die from the top down. However, unless we actually take that entire plant and split the stem and/or crown tissue, we're going to miss whatever pathogen is actually causing that plant to die. And so right here we have a corn plant with charcoal rot, and if we look down at the vascular bundles, we have a whole bunch of just small black little dots on these vascular bundles, and those are the microsclerotia that are diagnostic for the charcoal rot pathogen. Charcoal rot thrives in hot, dry conditions, and so as we think about the weather that we've had in Nebraska this year, we can anticipate a fair amount of charcoal rot occurring. Now, the other issue with our crown and stalk rots is sometimes it occurs further down in the actual crown. Other times it may be a few nodes up along the stem. And so this sample that I have here with the pink discoloration on the inside, this is caused by our fusarium stalk rot. So fusarium stalk rots can cause a few different colors on the inside. Sometimes it's pink, maybe it's darker red, other times it's white, but all of those can be a fusarium stalk rot. Fusarium can occur down in the crown tissue, or it may occur a little bit further up the plant as well. And then, again, on the soybean side of things, when we have general plant death from the soybeans, often the issue is going to be a little bit further down here in the lower stem or crown tissue. One of the best ways to check is to actually go out and split those stems and see what, if anything, you can find inside. And as we split this stem tissue, we have a whole bunch of hard black fungal fruiting bodies. These are the sclerotia that are formed by white mold of soybeans. So one of the ways that we can diagnose white mold of soybeans in the field is splitting the stems open and actually finding these hard black fruiting structures, kind of like I've pulled out on my knife here as well. But we have multiple sclerotia up and down the entire length of the plant. Now, one thing that I did want to mention, these plants can get pretty big. And one thing, in order to ship a sample to the diagnostic clinic, may be a little bit rough. So we always recommend that feel free to bend those samples in half if you kind of need to fold them multiple times in order to fit them into a large trash bag or a large plastic bag. That's just fine. The other thing is, if you are going to be in Lincoln or near Lincoln, we are open for walk-ins, and feel free to drop a sample off.
Kyle also says when submitting samples, it's best to collect plants that aren't completely dead because other bacteria could make the actual cause of death more difficult to determine. If you've got questions, you can reach out to the Plant and Pest Diagnostic Clinic at the information right there on the screen. Next up, Scott Heineman of Windside was excited the day his new roller crimper arrived back in April. That's because it meant that he could begin to experiment with the new machine, rolling down cereal rye cover crops that he had planted earlier into soybeans. Heineman is not afraid to try new things on his farm, and the roller crimper is one tool that could allow him to continue to build soil health on his farm and reduce inputs. You can get the details on what Heineman has learned so far in the September issue of Nebraska Farmer. And what do you say we get the details on the weather with Nebraska Extension Ag Climatologist and Market Journal Chief Meteorologist Al Dutcher? Great to see you, Al. What's the big weather story this week?
Well, Troy, we did see some heat really start to build into eastern Nebraska during the latter half of this week. And of course, in western Nebraska, about a day to 2 days earlier, depending on where you were, the Panhandle actually seen the warmest temperatures. We did see a little bit of a cool down, but unfortunately, when you look at the 7-day period from last Saturday through present, we basically have been above normal statewide. So even though we're starting to see signs of some more fall-like type temperatures coming in on occasion, we're just not getting anything that's holding into place. Now, we do have another storm system that is expected to come through next week, although there's some uncertainty in regards to the timing of that system and the subsequent systems following it. We will see a period of warm weather before then, and unfortunately, we'll start to see our winds pick up in earnest as we get into the later part of the weekend right before that storm comes in. So let's go to the upper air models and see how this next 7 days may play out. The first thing I'll draw your attention to, big ridge in place, trough to our west. As this trough pushes closer, we're going to see the winds increase. So those that are going down to see the football game down in Oklahoma, very warm conditions with very little wind. More than likely, we'll see low pressure developing in south central Canada. That's going to start to move its way slowly toward the east, and that'll push this precipitation band from the Pacific Northwest into the northern Rockies, particularly as we go into tomorrow. We're still going to see a fairly strong fetch of southwesterly winds, so expect 90-degree temperatures out west and upper 80s to low 90s in the east. Low pressure starts to develop in southeastern Montana. Once again, we see most of the concentrated precipitation over the northwest into northern California. And then the GFS model, it jumps this system all the way into the eastern Dakotas as we get into Monday. Might be just a tad bit too fast. Surface low develops in the eastern Dakotas. And we'll have a trailing cold front through the western part of the state. So the most concentrated area of precipitation right now with this system is expected to be across eastern Montana. As we get into Tuesday, the system slows down somewhat, and that's going to pull some colder air in on the back side, and that'll push the cold front through eastern Nebraska, probably during about the middle of the day. So we will see the chance for thunderstorm activity developing across eastern Nebraska, but really concentrated up toward the north. At Wednesday, we start to get a little break between the systems. A little ridging takes place, so we'll see a gradual warm up back into temperatures that will be more consistently into the 80s. Most of the precipitation stays to the east, very dry conditions behind it. That system that's in the Pacific Northwest rapidly drives itself into the Central Plains and deepens. We get low pressures showing from the GFS model in western Kansas, really not showing a lot of precipitation returns with it from the GFS model standpoint, so I would think it would be underplaying it with the position of that low. But as we get into Friday, this system kind of slows down somewhat, and this is when we start to see a big moisture feed toward the north. If the GFS model is correct about this system, we should see widespread precipitation developing across the eastern portions of Nebraska and western Iowa, and then that will push toward the east as we go through the weekend. And once again, we'll start to see a clearing trend as we get into the second half of next weekend. If we look farther into the future from next weekend through the end of the month, essentially, we're going to be looking at above normal temperatures as another ridge builds back in and another trough starts to develop in the Pacific Northwest in terms of precipitation. Of course, with that slow movement of that trough, we're going to see below normal precipitation most likely occurring in this region. And from all the standpoints that I can see from the models, it's probably going to be around the 4th to the 5th before that system starts to make its way into our region. So overall, it looks like we got a couple shots of precipitation here across Nebraska, and then we're going to go into a drying trend as we go into early parts of October.
Thanks, Al. That's going to do it for this week's show. If you missed a story, be sure to download the Market Journal mobile app, or you can follow us on social media to join in on the conversation. Next week, Casey McCarthy discusses caring for your summer calving herd as we head into the fall and winter months. Plus, Central Valley Ag's Luke Beckman joins us for a check on the markets. Hope to see you right back here next time. I'm Troy Moling. Thanks for watching.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.